Okay, being 7 o'clock, I call the Lisle Library District Special Board Meeting for March 24th, 2021 to order. The Lisle Library District recognizes Governor Pritzker's Executive Order Number 2021-05, which extends Executive Order 2020-07 as amended by Executive Order 2020-33 and Executive Order 2020-44, the January 8th, 2021 Disaster Proclamation and the Government Emergency Administration Act Number 100-06-40, which suspends certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act, allowing library trustees to participate remotely. All motions will require a roll call vote. May I have roll call, please?
Marjorie Bartelli.
Here.
Thomas Levy.
Here.
Thomas Hummel.
Here.
Karen Larson.
Here.
Jenny Norton.
Here.
Liz Sullivan.
Here.
Emily Swistak.
Here.
All right. Next item on the agenda is opportunity for visitors to speak. Are there any visitors that would like to speak? So you can just come to the microphone and you will have 5 minutes for public comment.
Okay, do I have to leave the mask on?
Yeah, we prefer, yeah, if you could.
My name is Kathy. Can you hear me? Is this on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Can't hear myself. My name is Kathy Moran, 2235 Pebble Creek Drive, Lisle. I actually grew up in Lisle. Went to the 2 Lisle libraries, one at where the Book Nook used to be, and then also right across from the train track. So I'm really familiar with Lisle. We came back 2003 and raised our family. Just a great place to be. I now own a small business in Lisle, and I'm thankful that business is beginning to pick up. I actually have work to do tonight. However, as I read about the issues that were being discussed, I felt that I had to come and voice my opinion. Let me say that I think a community library presence, and presence is in capital letters, is absolutely critical. I want to be on record as saying that. I got a hold of IPLAR, which is the Illinois Public Library Annual Report from 2020, which reports submitted by each Lisle library annually. I wanted to compare Wheaton, which is a town I lived in and I know well, to Lisle. And with Wheaton serving almost twice as many citizens as Lisle, the total expenditures I thought were interesting, with Lisle at 4.3 million and Wheaton serving almost twice as many people at 4.2 million. So it seems to me that, I started to be a little bit concerned about what is being discussed tonight. I'm also seeing that Lisle library card holders are down 37% from 2013 to 2021. So, I'm just researching again what's going on tonight. And from what I can see, the proposal is the same building and size, moving the entry and the circulation back to where it was about 20 years ago. Records show that there was a total renovation completed in 2007. And so it seems to me, to be fair, that every 10 years, you're probably going to need new carpeting, painting, maybe a new roof. So to me, just looking at this, it seems extravagant to now need an $8 million renovation, which looks to be almost like a total overhaul and moving of things. If this was my personal household finance discussed with my husband for a renovation that was suspect and maybe not needed, maybe some painting and some things to spruce it up a bit, but I would have to say that this would probably not go beyond the first conversation. You all are custodians of our taxpayer dollars, and we have entrusted you to be judicious and wise. Why do you refuse to put this issue up for referendum so we, the taxpayers, can decide if we want to renovate or not? I am concerned that this proposal will tie the hands of future library boards with the 20-plus years of tax increases for non-referendum debt. Put it to the citizens. Please let them decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anybody else on a public comment? Yeah, one more, please.
Grace Lake at 5234 Cedar Court, Lisle. I also grew up here from the time I was 10. I went to the library, I think, was it Front Street?
Yep.
Remember that library? It's here. Went through 202 schools. My kids have used the library. And I'm a library card holder now. I'm not one of the 37% who have no longer used their library card. Use it a lot more for remote and online books and things like that. So I'm going to ditto everything that Kathy said, and I think I was here late last year, and I said that. I find it, it just amazes me that you're not doing the logical step of asking the voters what they think, asking the taxpayers what they think. Because when you look at the numbers, what's going to happen is if this goes through and you're going to have to go into debt, you're going to raise people's taxes. So Tom Hummel, you're going to be a tax raiser. Okay, Tom Duffy, you're going to be a tax raiser. You're going to raise taxes because the only way you can pay for the debt. Karen, you're going to be a tax raiser too. I don't think that's not how I know you. The thing is, you don't want to be labeled as tax raisers. The only people that make money in this whole situation are the developers. So let's scale something back here. Let's do an alternative. Karen, you listed on your Facebook page, way back in the spring, all the maintenance things that needed to be done. Take care of that. Take care of all the maintenance things. And we all understand, just like Kathy pointed out, there are some things that need to be renovated. You need to do some carpeting, new roof things. Some of that needs to be done. But let's take care of the maintenance things first. Clean that up. The other thing is, I'm holding up a 3x5 file card. Okay? This represents my record, my library record here. Because when I came to renew my library card, my record is on a 3x5 library card, index card, excuse me. I mean, that's like 1970s technology. Where are you? And the thing is, just look at the macro trends. People are going to stores less. People are going shopping less. People are going to the library less. They're using the online facilities. Let's make that investment, okay? And maybe what we ought to do is start measuring Ms. Weinstein's objectives more by growing library card holders. Because less people coming to the library, less card holders, and you want to do an $8 to $11 million renovation? I mean, does that really make logical sense? And I agree with Kathy. I said this back in the fall. I ask you again, if this is such a great idea, put it to a referendum. Put it to a referendum. Let the people decide. Tom Duffy, I listened to your campaign stuff you're running for village trustee.
I'm going to interrupt you. Just to trust me or the board as a whole don't. Like,
What's that?
Just to trust me or the board as a whole don't.
Okay, but the thing is, people say, we're listening to you. Well, put it to a referendum. I'm using this as an example. He's on the library board. Why does we put it to a referendum? Tom, it makes sense. And so, Tom Duffy, please walk your talk. Let the citizens decide. And I really would appreciate that, because people know what they need. And I think that would be a really good thing before you spend one ounce of money, and because we can't afford the tax rates. And people here in Lisle cannot afford having their taxes raised after very multiple years of good reduction. Tom, and I give you credit for that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there anybody else? Is there anybody on the call or on the meeting? No? Any emails? No. I know the board, or I did it, I think the board got a couple of emails. I responded to both. Now it's had a phone call on the way in here too, so so we did get some communication with that. There's no other public comment. We will move on to the next agenda item, which is CCS introduction to financial analysis and concept design discussion to Director Weinstein. Do you want me to just turn it over to Mark? Mark, over.
All right, sounds good. Hopefully everyone remotely can hear me. I know the puck is across the room, so if you can't, please let me know. All right, sounds good. I see a thumbs up from Liz. There's been a lot of work in the past month since the team presented to the library board. What I wanted to do is give a brief introduction to those efforts to help facilitate the conversation, and then I'll turn it over to PMA and Sheehan Nagel Hartrade to go through the financial analysis and the designs in more detail. I first wanted to step back though and talk about where we're at and where things are going right now. So when we, the board first decided to go into the concept phase, there are a few goals, and that was really to align a concept design with a project funding option and project costs. So the steps we've taken the past month have really gone to great lengths to do that and give the library board some options at a high range and a low range of what could be done. To start with, I'd like to go and hopefully everyone sees has seen the packet. Page 1 of CCS's information has basically a checklist. Essentially, we're ongoing with the concept designs, the cost modeling we've done with CCS, and the project funding PMA will speak to tonight. At the end of tonight, the goal, to streamline the conclusion of the concept phase, would be for the board to find at least preliminary consensus on which of the options being presented should be packaged into a final package for board consideration. We're not asking for direction on a project, if it's a go or no go. It's a matter of being able to put together the binder of information that says, here's plans, here's project costs, here's funding, here's a project schedule, so that you then could consider that package as an option to move forward or not into the next step of design. Now, keep in mind, I did put in a brief outline of the next steps of design. We're just at the very preliminary phase of a design project. It's the concept phase. There's multiple iterations that would happen after this. Schematic design, design development, and construction documents. Those are typical in every construction project. What it gives the board an opportunity to, at those placeholders, give approval to the team to continue the project along. So you're never really hooked in until you really start putting the shovels into the ground. Yes, there are costs involved for those design phases, but it's a very small fraction of the cost of the project. So I wanted to key in that in the concept phase, you're looking at a very high level of the project. In other words, is using the renovation example, is the entry needing to be on Front Street, main entry that is. Does the youth services need to be on the first floor instead of the second floor so it can fit the proper space? That's it. All the walls and things like that, those can be tweaked and changed. Even number of bathrooms can be changed. We really want to get a high level concept of, yes, this is overall project cost that you want to see packaged in a final package. Hopefully that helps clarify why we're here today. I'm going on to my point B from the packet, the development. This is really to summarize what's happened over the past month. So PMA, after having presented the last board meeting, looking at some of the historical data and seeing the financial projections with the gap between expenses and revenues, worked with the library staff to project out 20 years what future financial projections needed to be put in place. And the goal of that exercise was really to find a sustainable footing that met the library's long-term needs financially first, and then back into what a project cost might be able to be to support those financial goals. So what was found by PMA after they projected things out was that about an $8.1 million project, and I'll let Bob describe this a little bit more. Bob from PMA was on. can maintain a minimum level of at least 50%, 50% of annual expenditures in the corporate fund. So in other words, you'd never go below 50%, being able to continually fund the library for 6 months. And once you hit that 50%, there's actual slight increases there, which that 50%, according to PMA's history and our history, seems to be level footing for the library. Going below that, there are some options, but that's when it starts to get a little bit more risky and ill-advised.
No, I'm just-
Okay. The other thing that PMA did find, they did an analysis that they'll hit on first, was what the current board's decisions over the past 3 or 4 years in terms of tax levies have saved Lisle taxpayers. I thought that was interesting to look at, especially because expenditures just for any entity are going to go up, right? There's inflation, there's escalation, things get more expensive to do. Regardless of that, this financial plan that PMA has put together is able to capture about a $29 to $30 million taxpayer savings over the next 20 years, as well as keep the library financial footing. The next thing is she and Nagel Hartree, to their credit, really took some big steps in trying to align a concept option that aligned to that roughly $8.1 million project cost, and saying what the library could get for that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then CCS, we actually took it a step in putting together project costs for multiple options that you guys have seen. So at the end of today, what we're looking for is roughly, if there's preliminary consensus on what a project budget could potentially be, if the conceptual plans at a high level are something that should be packaged at least for the conclusion of concept phase and further refined in later steps. If we are then to put together a project schedule based on that concept, and also work together with the project team to continue next steps. We can talk about those later in April, but really that's the goal of this. So I'm going to go on to my page 3, and I will share it so everyone sees it, just in case you don't. But it's the chart that compares the options we're going to see. And there we go. If everyone sees this now. There we go. So these are the 2 options that you'll see in design as design to one of PMA's financial analysis. The total building size does increase slightly for the renovation option we're showing in terms of getting new entry vestibules. The reason why that increase is important is that your youth service area can be right sized. Right now, your youth service department, as said by staff as well as analyzed, is too small. You can't fit the right programs, you can't fit the right spaces, you can't fit the right materials. So that's a little bit of a bump out on the first floor, and the second floor allows the youth service area to be the right size and also get the entry in the right space. We put together some order of magnitude project costs. That is, the project cost is the all-in cost. Consultants, everything that's trying to package that for you. We put the detail behind that in the packet that you get on whichever option you want to go forward with. The construction cost is the portion of the project that is simply directed towards a contractor. So there'd also be change order contingencies and things like that, that you can see the percentages. All in, it looks to be about a 25 to 30% ratio, which is standard for projects. The one thing that was really interesting that we put together is the inclusions comparison. That's looking at the items that the board said were really important to make this project a success. Putting the main entry back on Front Street so people don't get turned around when they're trying to find the library for the first time and pick up on it. Both options at both price ranges do that. Getting a right-sized youth department, both options do that. Family restrooms, both options do that. The teen collection space, again, both options do that. It's something you don't have right now. Drive-up windows, again, something that happens. Stormwater issues being addressed, that's in both these options. Additional study rooms and outdoor program space. Now, outdoor program space in the designs you'll see today, in the renovation option, it's a little bit more nebulous, but there are opportunities to put it around the site that you could take advantage of. One option that you'll see in the north entry renovation option is putting it where your current entry is and taking advantage of that canopy space. The last thing, and probably a very important thing, is that all the priority items from the facility condition assessment are taken care of in both of these options through 10 years. There are things that are, such as a new roof, that aren't really factored in the $8 million. We could do that as an alternate. The reason why is because you don't want to go and spend money and you're looking at about $500,000, if not more, on replacing the roofs. If you spend that now, you're basically throwing away 10 years of use on that roof because the roof is still good. You don't have leaks right now. So why throw away 10 good years on a roof, redo it, and have to redo it again? Roofs have a lifespan of around 30 years. So if you have 10 years of that now, and then you replace that roof 10 years from now you're getting 40 years out of it instead of just throwing that money out the door. So there's important things there. I will say some of the items that are 10 plus years are included, such as replacing all of your windows. That was in their condition assessment. The reason why that is if you're bringing contractors in and they're taking up drywall, they're touching things in here, it's more efficient to do that now than later. You're going to have a much higher cost to do it in that later, not only because of escalation, but because there's a contractor coming in just to do that work versus doing the whole thing. There's a lot of economies of scale bundling work instead of spreading it out. I am showing the 13.8 on the west entry concept. That was on the high end, trying to figure out where's the scale of where a project can land. But I think the important thing is to listen to PMA's financial analysis, listen to Sheena Nagel Hartree's presentation on designs, and see if there's consensus once we get through all that. Last, I know Trustee Sullivan had asked us to put together a brief update to the schedule. So we did put that in the back of our information, and really highlights again that we're ideally trying to finalize a packet for the board to review next month and determine what the next steps are then. So with that being said, I will stop sharing my screen. I'll actually ask if there's any questions right now. If not,
I got a quick question. So the order of magnitude project cost, you have 8 million, and then order of magnitude construction cost 5.72. The difference, I missed that. I think I said the answer, but I missed it.
So the construction cost is literally you're going to hire a general contractor, construction manager, and that's their cost to do it. You have furniture that's not in there.
Okay.
You're going to have to replace that. You're going to have to do things such as legal fees and consultant fees, all of that.
Okay, I think he answered it. I just missed it.
Yep.
Okay,
Traditional ratio is right around 30%.
Okay.
That's roughly where we are actually putting in. And again, we'll put all that detail in a packet of the final one. But there's actual dollar amounts, not percentages. We don't like just putting percentages because they can sway depending on the project.
Any other trustees with a question or comment for Mark? Vice President Bartelli?
Yes, Mark, I know what order of magnitude construction cost is. It's the arrangement of a number of items determined by their size. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wait, I'm having difficulty understanding the distinct difference in that cost there. I mean, it's double. So can you explain that further for me?
Sure. So I'll explain how CCS goes about looking at these estimates for the construction cost. We literally take off all of the different rooms that would be in either of these plans. And we figure out how much it would cost in terms of the walls, the doors, the electrical, all the different components of that, and put it into a package. We also do what's called shell and core, which is basically the facade of the building, and then things such as stairs, elevators, all that is built into shell and core. And those two components, plus the site work, go into the construction cost. So the difference between these two in the designs is number one, the north entry renovation option, the $8 million option, takes advantage of your exterior walls. You're not having to rebuild exterior walls or take down a significant portion of the building. In the west entry concept, there's about, and I don't have the percentages exact, I'll say 60, 40, some split like that, where maybe 40% of the building is coming down and then being rebuilt. So that means you're rebuilding exterior walls, you're rebuilding the structure of that. And glass, for instance, on exterior walls gets expensive. Masonry walls get expensive. So that's where some of the economies of scales are lost there. The other portion of it is in some of the site work. In the west entry concept, you can imagine the cost to do the ring around the road. There's a lot more site work involved with that, a lot more digging, a lot more prep, and that starts driving the cost. You also have a lot more work in terms of the shell and core, not just in terms of the exterior walls, but the columns, the footings. There's a lot of work to put up a new section of building. Whereas in the north entry renovation, you're taking advantage of the sunken built cost that's already here today. You're leveraging that to go forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other trustees with a question or comment? Seeing none. Karen, did you have a-
No, not right now.
All right.
All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to Bob from PMA. I know we've got to switch who's presenters. I'll do that on my end, and Bob, I'll make you present.
All right. So next item on the agenda is PMA financial projection analysis.
Pardon me. Thank you for having me here tonight. Just give me a moment to start screen sharing. Okay, do you?
We can see it, Bob.
Oh, you can. I'm sorry. On my screen, it didn't change at all. So sorry, I'm not as familiar with this platform. It's amazing how many platforms are out there. Okay. Thank you. Thank you again for having me here tonight to share with you. The model that I'm presenting on my screen, or the presentation, is slightly different than the one that was provided in the board packets. I will highlight a little later in the presentation a change that we made that had a modest impact on the analysis. And this is an extension of what we began at the last meeting. This, of course, last month allowed us to do additional due diligence on the library. You know, in the prior analysis, we're looking more historically, giving you some overview on how financings work in Illinois. Now we've had the last month to work with the administration and Mark to go over this model that I'm going to present tonight. Well, when we were building the model, what really jumped out to us as we were putting together the historical data and looking at the projection going forward is the amount of savings that the library had generated for its taxpayers the last 5 years. The gray area that you see there represents the historical savings plus the estimated savings going forward. You know, to date, the annual reduction in taxes has accumulated to about $3 million. But because of the way the tax cap works, that a reduction that you've made in prior years compounds forward versus the scenario in which the district would have taken what was available for underneath the property tax extension limitation law, or commonly known as a tax cap. And that amount is represented by the purple bars. So if the district had just taken the CPI, which is very common for a lot of taxing bodies to do, you would have seen your revenues grow on that trajectory. But because the library reduced those revenues, your taxpayers experience that savings. Over the 20-year horizon on this model, the accumulated area, that gray amount, is $30 million roughly of taxes that you didn't collect as a result of the decisions that this library board has made. The blue column represents what the taxes could be going forward should the library increase its extension to the CPI assumption, and we're using 1.5% here, and in addition to capturing the additional taxes from the new property. I'm going to talk about what new property means on a subsequent slide.
Bob, this is Mark. Just to interrupt and ask a question. In terms of CPI, just explain that for those who might be less familiar with it.
Yeah.
My understanding is that that is a percentage that is allowed by the property tax code to allow taxing bodies to keep up with inflation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the CPI, and what I should probably even step back one from there and just tell you what CPI is. It's a consumer price index. It's calculated by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's meant to be a measurement of the change in prices of a market basket of goods from one year to the next. When PTEL came into effect, it limited the annual increases to be the lesser of 5% CPI, thinking taxing bodies should be able to live on the CPI increase to cover their annual increases in expenses from one year to the next. prior to that adoption, if your EAV went up 5%, you could collect 5% more revenues. And that's what brought about the tax cap laws, because that was taking place in a lot of the Chicago metro area. And we have some historical data here on a subsequent slide to show you what CPI has been over the last few years. Over the last few years, I think the last 10 years, and we looked at some of the averages as well. So the change, I want to point out a typo
Hey,
that was
Bob?
in. Yes,
Could I just ask you a question on the previous slide?
sure.
Can you explain the difference between a body like ours giving a one-time tax rebate versus actually doing reduction in taxes?
Well, see what you didn't essentially do just a one-time reduction. If you look at, I'm pointing at my screen here, you can't really see what I'm pointing at, but if you look at levy year 16 to 17, you reduce taxes from that year to the next, the top of the blue column to the next blue column. And you did it again from levy year 17 to 18, levy year 18 to 19, and then levy year 20, it's about, it's going to depend on what your new property is, but it's about the same. And so you did 4 consecutive declines in your taxes. Sometimes taxing bodies will do a 1-year decrease and then they raise it back up. In your case, you have gone out and done it more years than what I've typically seen other taxing bodies do. Oftentimes other taxing bodies, when they reduce the taxes for 1 year, they're reducing a non-tax, a non-cap levy, which is typically their bond levy, because a bond levy is outside the tax cap. So if they, most taxing bodies, if they want to give a 1-year break, they'll lower the bond levy and then the next year bring it back up. And that reduction in the bond levy, they'll pay for out of some of the fund balance that they have on hand. And the impact of making that type of decision is the impact is not permanent because the CPI increase was still taken on the operating side. In your case, you didn't have a bond payment to abate. So when you lowered taxes, that permanently impacted the inner workings of the tax cap and your ability to raise taxes going forward. You sort of locked in the savings permanently for your taxpayers, which is what the gray area represents. Did that answer your question?
If you were a Lisle resident right now, would you be happy or mad at the Lisle Library?
If I were a Lisle resident paying property taxes, I would be happy you did this as long as I didn't see a reduction in services over those few years. You know, it's one thing to make a tax cut and be able to maintain what you were providing for your citizens. And we're going to look a little bit into the details here in a moment and how you were able to do that versus, you know, my own personal experience that I've had with the taxing body lowering or freezing taxes. It's impacted the service that I'm getting from this particular taxing body. And that's been frustrating for me as a taxpayer. I would have rather them taken the increase.
Well, we can help you understand that too. So just give us a minute. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Oh, no problem. Those are good questions. Yeah, the tax cap is a very complicated type of mechanism that's oftentimes misunderstood how it works. And it really has a lot to do with reassessment and CPI and new property and how those work together, because your limiting rate is what limits the amount of taxes that you can collect, but your limiting rate is recalculated each year based off the inner workings of your EAV reassessment and CPI. I was going to point out the correction here. We changed the CPI in levy year 20 from there was a typo there, it had 1%, it was actually 2.3%. It didn't really impact the model that much because the model was, well, I won't get into why it didn't impact that much. You'll see in a moment that it didn't. What it really impacted is the amount of savings. It was under $30 million in the slide that you have. We're now showing over $30 million because essentially you could have taken a larger increase in taxes because CPI is 2.3%, so 1%. That's why the estimated savings went up. Now we've removed the highlightings in the purple column and the blue column in certain cells, and those are cells where it's actual data. Whereas purple data is hypothetical, what you could have done. Blue is the projection going forward below the solid line. And then we also changed the color coding for the tax dollars saved to match the color coding on the graph. So it matches the gray shaded area. The extension going forward, we changed the title of it a little bit. Before it said assuming CPI growth, CPI/new property growth. So what do we mean by new property? New property includes, if somebody does a tear down and builds a new home, or somebody adds a deck to their house, or does some other sort of improvement to their home, that gets added to the EAV at some point, or if a business does improvements. So that's the new property that comes on. It's also the expiration of TIF district. So in certain areas, when a TIF district expires, that value comes back onto the tax rolls as new property. So those are additional dollars that you can collect taxes on over and above the CPI on an annual basis. So in the model going forward, we've assumed the CPI 1.5% and a new property of $5 million. $5 million is approximately the average over the last few years. The CPI in levy year 21 is a 1.4%. That is not a typo. That's the actual CPI that will apply to levy year 2021. It's based off the CPI that just came out in January of 21. So this blue column here is the recommendation that we have for you based on the projections, not the projections, but the projects being considered at this time, while at the same time trying to maintain that 50% fund balance. So you're trying to maintain both of those goals. The increase in the extension from year to year is, in that first year, it's a little higher from levy year 20 to 21. It's about $14 on a $300,000 home in the library district. After that, it's about $5 per year of an impact on a $300,000 home.
Before moving on, Bob, too, one thing I noticed, I'm just noticing this now, actually, even though we've started this for a while, and just wanted to point out, so from 2016, the extension was 4.88 million. That was actual revenues, correct?
Correct.
Right, so just to put it in context, it takes 13 years to get back to 4.88, 13 years of escalation and it's CPI to get back there, which is interesting just looking at. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what the actual CPI does to that regardless. And it's a long time to get back.
The other thing, excuse me, I also know the levy we have now is basically the same levy we had roughly in 2009.
So it's a 13-year.
Yeah, so it's like 11 years, 12 years back, and then going back would be, or going forward would be about 13 years to get back to the high water mark.
And Bob, if you could go through, I know you started explaining some of the column titles, but it just so that everybody is aware and those who watch this video later understand EAD, limiting rate,
Sure.
property, if you could go through those.
Yeah, so and I'll go ahead and start with levy year. Levy year is the year in which the property is actually assessed. You don't collect the taxes on that until the next year. And then those taxes are collected for the following fiscal year. So it sometimes can get confusing. You got to pay attention to what year is being shown there. So levy year 16 were for taxes collected in 17, which would show up in your 18 audit. Equalized assessed value is the value of all the property within the district, commercial, industrial, residential. Now you're mostly residential, so that's your largest component of your equalized assessed value. That's roughly 1/3 of the market value in a taxing body. The limiting rate is the tax rate that's multiplied by your EAV divided by 100. That gets you to the tax extension. Your limiting rate changes each year based on the relationship between CPI and reassessment. That's how the tax cap works. So if EAV is reassessed 5% higher, but CPI is only 0.7%, your limiting rate is going to come down, so you don't collect more than 0.7%. conversely, it worked. We all saw after the Great Recession, it worked in reverse. As EAV went down, the limiting rate went up, so you could collect the CPI. New property, I already explained. CPI, we've explained. So the extension then, the hypothetical extension is calculated utilizing, assuming that you had took the dollars that were permitted as the maximum amount under the tax cap law, based on the CPI and the new property available that year. So your limiting rate, let me add one other thing, from one year to the next, is calculated based off last year's extension. So when you lowered last year's extension, that lowers your limiting rate for the next year. So they're interconnected with each other, the decision one year to the next. Now, the purple is a hypothetical amount, assuming that the district had always taken what was available under the tax cap law. The blue column is the actual dollars taken for the first 5 years, followed by the projection going forward, assuming the district were to levy up to 1.5% CPI and new property. Any other questions on that?
I do have one question. So in 2021, you got 4,217,000, and now you got 4,218,237, and that's from 4,026,000 the year before. How did you come up with that? Because when I take 1.4%, that's way too high.
Yeah, that's a very good question. As we were putting the model together, when the increase was taken from the prior year's extension to the next, levy year 20 to 21, if you just had CPI, the model was not working as far as being able to achieve the desired, I shouldn't say desired, but the option B project that you're going to see later in the presentation. And an element in the PTEL tax code, which this is all in the handbook that's available on the Department of Revenue's website, you can actually go back to the highest point in the last 3 years. So we took the increase in levy year 21 off of levy year 18. So that's a little known and little utilized feature, because most of the time taxing bodies are going up, their highest point in the last 3 years is the prior year. Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah, but even with that, that's what I figured, I thought you did, but do you then get all the CPI back, or is it just, because if you take that times the 1.4%, I still don't think that added up.
Well, you're also getting the new property on there, so you have to take the 4.1 million, increase it by 1.4%, and then add to that the new property times 0.311. That should get you the number in the blue column.
And Bob, this blue column, this is exactly the numbers that tie in and created the graph on the first page we saw. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah, those match the columns in the dark blue columns in the first page.
Okay.
And then that's the data that flows into the model. Any other questions on this slide? Okay, if you come up with some later, we can always go back. So let's look at the historical CPI. CPI, the tax cap law says it's always the lower of CPI or 5%. It's never been 5% since the tax cap law came in. The closest we ever got was a 4.1%, and that was like 15 years ago. The average 3-year average of CPI is 1.87%, 5 is 1.96, 10 years 1.75. So it's just below 2%, which sort of goes with the dialogue. If you follow the Fed, the Fed would like CPI or inflation to be around 2%. They use a different measure of 2%, but they get frustrated because they can't ever get, it doesn't seem like inflation ever gets above 2%, and that's what the averages are showing here. And for the model, we used a CPI assumption of 1.5%. For the future years. We believe that's conservative based off this history. I know last year was a 1.4, so it's one notch below that. But last year, right after the pandemic hit, CPI took a dive. We actually thought at one point CPI might be negative in 2020, but as the economy recovered a lot faster than many of us anticipated, including the stock market, CPI recovered and we actually ended up at a 1.4%. In the year the financial crisis hit, the CPI was only 0.1%. So that's what we were thinking might happen again. Now, it's really important in the model, why it's good to start out conservative too. For the inner workings of the model, it's really good to have your early years and actual experience be better than what the assumption was because of the compounding effect. If you start off with a 0.5 and then you assume 1.5, you're behind a little bit in your assumptions in the model. So it's always good to get off to a good start. And then if you end up averaging, let's say 2%, 2.25%, a lot of people are worried about higher CPI here over the next few years. That doesn't mean you have to constantly take the CPI each year. Maybe after 4 or 5 years, the library board at that time can look at and say, okay, our finances are doing better than what we projected 5 years ago. We really don't have to take the full CPI this year because we're ahead of where we thought we were going to be in our projection model. So it doesn't necessarily mean, even though it's what we're showing here, that you take CPI every year. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to do that because you have to monitor that. You have to monitor your expense trends, which we're going to talk about here in the next slide, and make sure that you're achieving your fund balance goal at the same time. Any other questions on the CPI slide? Okay. So let's look at your historical operating expenditures. So this is includes operating expenditures. It doesn't include the special reserve fund or the IMRF expenditures. And then we've also pulled out and examined separately your major operating expenditure, which is your employee costs. I mean, it's the major operating expenditure for every business, every taxing body. And just like the CPI, we took an analysis of the averages. Pardon me. And looking at the historical averages, it shows that the library has done a good job controlling its expenditures. Hence why you've been able to provide some of those tax savings to your property taxpayers. That said, you still had increases on any of those averages. The overall experience you've had on employee costs is good due to your good management that you've done as a board and administration. And it also was aided by some of the retirements. You always hate losing good employees that you've had as a part of your team for a while and all that knowledge that they carry with them. But when they do retire, it does help you financially because you're usually replacing them with a lower cost employee. And some of that retirement experience impacted the averages for the last 3 years and 5 years. The overall operating expenditures increased around 2% and 1.77%. So in the model, we used 1.65%. That's slightly below, but in line with the averages. And we talked about that quite a bit with Mark and Director Weinstein, and she felt comfortable that she'd be able to achieve this and that it's attainable. Essentially, the message here is your CPI is 1.5%. The new property, that $5 million, takes your average annual increase in revenues to right around 1.7% after the first year. So essentially, the message here is you got to work hard to keep your expenses and your revenues in line with each other. So if you're able to hold the line more on expenses than we've assumed, you might be able to dial back those property tax increases a little bit. Any questions on the data presented on this slide?
Just a quick question. Is the employee cost just salaries, or is that salary and benefits? I didn't have time to look it up.
I think it's both. I would have to verify with Andrew to be certain, but usually we would include both in that.
Any other questions or comments? Steve?
It's both.
It's both. Thank you.
Oh, it's both? Okay.
Is that Andrew?
Yeah, that's what it sounded like.
Yeah.
Is he in?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, it's Andrew here.
Hi, Andrew. Oh, that was in my head.
All righty. Any other questions or comments from trustees? Okay.
Yes, Bob or
Yes.
Andrew. for Andrew, since Andrew seems to be floating around somewhere. Do you have any insight in terms of employee benefits in libraries or even in villages or towns or cities? What percentage of the benefits employees pay?
I don't have that type of data. And there's another company we used to be affiliated with. We no longer are, Forecast 5 Analytics. They do a lot of surveys and have a lot of data on that. I know sometimes in the absence of using a company like that that gathers the data, that sometimes the directors or business officials will share that type of data in their peer group. So I don't know if the library might have that information available. I don't know if that's something that you share amongst each other.
We did an analysis that maybe a year ago, wasn't it? And we did raise the percentage for employees at that time.
It seems to be trending that way from what I hear. I know you don't have any labor unions here, but a lot of times the strategy from a lot of our school clients when they go into labor negotiations is try to get more and more of the benefits paid by the employees.
So Tatiana, do you have an idea of what the average consensus was?
That, I think we moved us up to the 90-10 model, which was, I think, the average for number of neighboring libraries that we polled. And we were kind of somewhere in the middle. I think that's where we always go in terms of when we adjust something, we try to find a satisfying place in the middle.
Great, thank you.
So transition now to slide 7, which brings together the revenue and the expenditure data. So this is now by fiscal year. Just want to point that out. So starting off with fiscal year 21, your current year that you're in, and the expenditures, and this is without the capital contributions, the operating expenditures are forecasted to increase by 1.65% per year. And we contrast that with the flat revenues, because I know that the past few years you're trying to keep revenues flat or decreasing them to show that if expenses do increase at 1.65% over time, over time obviously you'd be doing some significant deficit spending. So the next column, the revenues, including the CPI new property growth, which funnel over from the prior slide. That is given there in the third column of data. And then the fourth column is just the difference between the revenues and expenditures. And we've called that the revenues available for capital contributions. By capital contributions, we're talking about the funds that are transferred to the special reserve fund to pay for pay-as-you-go capital, as well as the debt service on any sort of financial obligation, like the debt certificate that's under consideration. Any questions on this slide? Great. So slide 8 is a graphical representation of the data presented on the prior slide. The green line represents the revenues. The dashed line represents the expenditures. The blue line at the bottom shows you the difference. And essentially the message that is shown here graphically in this picture is one that I already communicated. The key takeaway from here is that the plan, it looks to be sustainable with the assumptions that we've made, as long as the library over time really tries to sustain its increase of its revenues and expenditures on the same trajectory. Because you notice the gap between the two is about the same. It widens slightly as you go out, and showing you that you have a little bit of wiggle room there in the expenditure assumption, but not much. But if CPI were, right off the bat to average 2.25% over the next 5 years, that green line is going to increase faster, which means you could slow down the growth of that green line at some point if the library wanted to control the increase in its property taxes.
And that slight growth also is important as owners rep looking at it. What we do for a lot of clients is project out maintenance costs at the end of a project for 20 years, whatever that might be. Especially for libraries, it might be about a 20-year cycle, or 10 to 20 years. And by the time you're getting that 10 to 20 years, it's accurate. You're looking at carpet potentially, looking at paint, things get beat up. Like, you look at the walls in here and in your bathrooms right now, things like that. Any other improvements that, even though it's growing a little bit, but most likely use those for essentially new roof. It might be an option to put off for 10 years and do it next, and try to not spend money now you don't need to do it later. So that's the importance of that, and why we kind of gravitated towards this model as compared to want to put that number tighter. We don't want to put you in a position that is financially unsustainable. You don't have the ability to take care of your property 10 years from now.
One thing I wanted to point out that if you dig into the data more, you'll notice from fiscal year 23 to 24 that the change in the revenues is very negligible in that year. And because in addition to taking the CPI new property increase, we had to make an adjustment of how your property taxes by fund are allocated. The last couple years, you have intentionally lowered your IMRF levy in order to reduce the balance in the IMRF fund. And in doing that, there's more dollars going to corporate fund. Well, later on, when the IMRF fund gets to its ideal balance, which we think will be in about a year, you have to shift some of that rate back to the IMRF fund to maintain balance in that fund going forward. So that is what results in sort of the flatness you have from that one year to the next. So now we're ready to jump into the projection model, unless there's any other questions about the data in the first section.
Yeah, I just want to, maybe I missed your answer on the IMRF, because the IMRF, at least in our last audit report, was like at 100%, 104% funded. So I kind of missed what you were trying to say there with, so I mean, we get IMRF. So, and it doesn't have to, I mean, it's great that it's 104%, but I mean, I would say the wiggle room with an IMRF fund is it doesn't have to always be 100%. I mean, is it 80 or 90%? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I agree, because but you're going to have another deficit this year and a deficit the following year. It's going to be 2 more years that you're under levying IMRF to lower that down to about 50%.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now we're ready to review the options here on slide 10. So we're highlighting 3, we want to really emphasize their example options. These aren't the only choices that you could make. We want to give you some options as sort of the bookends, with the idea that option 2 is consistent with what Mark had talked about earlier. So let me talk about the 3 options and some of the differences here. So the options vary by the size of the corporate fund contribution, as you can see in line 1. Option 1 has the largest contribution, and option 3 has the lowest, ranging from differing by $1 million. The special reserve fund contribution is kept the same, and the other variation between the 3 options is the size of the debt certificate issue. The debt certificate is the largest in option 1; it's the smallest in option 3. And then the transfer from the corporate fund to the special reserve fund will also vary, and it varies by the amount that's needed to go to service the debt and to provide additional funds for pay-as-you-go capital maintenance that Mark was talking about. Yeah. When we get to that next line, where the low point of cash, the corporate fund as fund balance percentage, and this as a percentage of expenditures. One of the ideas that I mentioned earlier is we wanted to keep that at 50% or higher. And option 1 takes you all the way down to 26%. So we really don't think that that's viable, because the fund balance gets too low. And option 2, option 3, both of them stay above 50%. Now, the next line below that, the fiscal year of cash flow fund balance low, that's in the model. In the initial years of the projection, the expenses are slightly and the transfers are slightly outpacing the revenues that come in. So there's a decrease in the fund balance, a gradual decrease in the fund balance each year until it sort of bottoms out in fiscal year 27-28 at 51%, and then it would start increasing after that. In option 3, it bottoms out at 63% almost right away in fiscal year 21 and 22. The special reserve fund, its low fund balance is right around $80,000. And, Andrew, we don't have a year on that. What is that after they make the transfer for the project, or is that at a different point in time?
Yeah, sorry. This is Andrew, by the way. I should have introduced myself last time I spoke up. But you're right. That the model just contributes from the special reserve fund an amount to bring that balance down to what we're showing there, and then each year the transfer from the corporate fund to the special reserve fund is such that there is a slight surplus in the special reserve fund given the expenses that we modeled in there, so that the low point in the special reserve fund occurs in that first year. That's why I didn't include a fiscal year for the point at which that low point is reached.
Thank you. So before I transition to the next slide, are there any questions about the options here? Or Mark, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think the only thing that we'll cover more when we talk with Don, Eric, and the team, or she and Nagel Hartree, is looking at option 2 and option 3, the sustainable options as we're looking at here. There's a significant drop off in terms of the value of the project between 8.1 and 7.1 in terms of what you get. In terms of trying to right size your youth service, get the drive-through, ensure that you have family restrooms with the youth service, things like that. You can start taking away some of those elements from the $8 million project cost option that we put out there, but you'll start losing those elements in that. So we just want to allude to, we don't believe that the whole checklist that the board came up with as the parameters for the concept design, you really need about that $8 million to get that checklist. As soon as you go below that, you're starting to take things away from the checks that you wouldn't get. Just highlighting that.
And then the one question I have is just to read, or just to confirm, debt certificates, that would come out of like the regular levy. So there's not a debt service levy for that, correct?
That's correct. There is no additional levy that you can extend for that. You have to pay it out of your existing resources or your operating resources.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the major assumptions in option 2, we've already touched on most, if not all of these as we went through it, but it's good to summarize them and recap them here. The project cost of $8.1 million, and you can see the various sources of funding for that. The operating revenues, you have CPI of 1.5% moving forward. New property assumed at $5 million per year. And then the aforementioned IMRF levy resumed to match the full annual expenditure in levy year 2022. The expenditures our increases roughly match the revenue growth at 1.65% per year. We did make an adjustment to the building costs because assumed efficiencies created from the renovation project. That reduction was $38,000. And then there's a transfer to the corporate fund, from the corporate fund to the special reserve fund or perhaps a debt service fund of $117,000 per year. The reason why we said that is you haven't had debt service in the past. You're in consultation with the auditor, they may want you to set up a separate debt service fund. So that transfer, some of it would go to special reserve, some of it might go to a new debt service fund. But the result is the same, that you're transferring out $117,000.
But a debt service fund doesn't automatically trigger a new levy or anything, does it?
No, yeah, there's no new levies, just for accounting.
Okay, for accounting.
The transparency of accounting,
Gotcha.
that they might want you to put in a different fund.
Gotcha.
Shoot the accountants, Tom.
No, I just clarifying, make sure it's just an accounting issue.
So slide 12 gets us to the sensitivity analysis, because the only thing I can say with 100% certainty tonight is that your actual experience will be different than the experience in this model. And so it's good to understand the sensitivity of the analysis as key variables change. So if CPI changes by 0.1%, that changes your revenue by $4,000 annually. So that, of course, would compound forward. So it's $4,000 in the first year times 20, really, over the life of the model. New property sensitivity to $1 million on new property is $2,800. And The expenditure assumption for a 0.1% difference is 3,785. So it makes sense given that we're trying to show the growth relatively the same to make the model work, that the sensitivity on the expenditures in the CPI would be roughly the same, right around $4,000. And then the interest rate assumption on the debt certificates is for every 10 basis point change, or 0.1%, in our nomenclature we call it 10 basis points. It's about $970. Now, when we modeled the debt certificate for here, we were using current market interest rates at that time, plus an extra 0.5%. So hopefully we provide enough cushion that interest rates were to continue to rise before you, if and when you sell any debt certificates, it would hopefully come in lower than what was built into the model. So that is the sum of our presentation, and I would be happy, Andrew and I both be happy to answer any questions that we haven't already answered.
Any other questions, comments?
So I have
Go
a
ahead,
question. I
Trustee
just
Leslie.
want to make sure I understand it. So basically, going with the 8 point, theoretically, if we went with the 8.1 million, we'd only have to get a debt certificate for 1.6 million. Am I correct? It's not like we're going out and borrowing 8.1 million or 13 million or 10 million. We're only borrowing 1.6.
Correct.
Okay.
That's
what I
correct.
heard before.
Yep.
Because I knew that we had enough in the special reserve, and I knew that we had enough in the other fund to cover a good portion of it without overextending, you know, the budget.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another uncommon thing I see amongst our clients and taxing bodies. Not only have you generated a significant amount of savings for your taxpayers, it's very uncommon to see a project of this magnitude be done with the financing element being about 20% of the sources of funds.
A lot of times entities that we've worked with in the past are comfortable taking a higher amount because, at least historically, recently, rates have been so low. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, rates were higher. They will go eventually back up. And it gets much harder to borrow. So I'm looking at it, 1.6, you're potentially borrowing 1.6 at the bottom of the market in terms of percentage points if you can have that interest, which is another advantage. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Really, you can't go much lower than what we're at right now.
I think, Mr. Duffy, do you have a question?
No, Trustee Duffy.
Yes, one quick question, which is, and I know these were just examples, but in theory, could you take option 2 but apply the CF contribution from option 1 to 2, so it'd be 3.2 million, and then with that, and then thus you would probably have the debt certificate issue size roughly the same as option 3. In other words, like, am I able to move pieces of option 1 to option 2?
For sure. Yeah, Andrew, I'm gonna throw that to you. I suspect that the consequence of that is your fund balance ratio would probably fall below that 50% target. But Andrew, I'll let you address that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right here. I'm just doing some quick math in our model. And let me see, 38,000.
You're calculating that percentage right now, that 50, what instead of 51.1%, what that would be instead?
Correct.
Okay.
I
was buying you.
It does take you down to around, let's say, between 35 and 40% in your corporate fund balance.
Okay.
In the first year
Um,
or eventually?
oops. Sorry, in
Go ahead.
that first year, yes. And then
So,
because the financing is then smaller, your annual transfers from the corporate fund to the special reserve fund would be smaller, such that the low point in the corporate fund occurs in that first year, and every year after that, there is a surplus generated in the corporate fund. But it does get down to around 37%.
so let me make sure I regurgitate that back in my unaccountant language. Is that if theoretically if you did 3.2, you borrow 1 mil. At the low point, it's going to be about, let's say, 35% of it. But after that, because we have borrowed such the smallest amount, we would probably have the recouping getting back up to 50%. The time that would go into it would be smaller. Is that my understanding what I just heard there?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I would add that according to the model, you would reach that 50% fund balance target in fiscal year ending 2034. So the low point is reached right away at 37%, and then 50% is reached in fiscal year ending 2034.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually, can I follow up with that conversation? So if I'm not mistaken, doesn't the state recommend, or their minimum recommendation is 25% reserve balance? Or, I mean, it's not mandatory, but isn't that like the recommended thing? But the bigger thing is, at least as far as the libraries go too, is, basically all our revenue comes from property tax. So it's not like a village where they have multiple funds. Like I think it's roughly 25% of their revenues property tax, and about 25% sales tax, 25% like utility tax, et cetera, et cetera. Where they have some variables, like this past year, because of the economy, if their sales tax revenue went down, that could really affect if they have to tap into reserves. Where our finances are a little bit more stable because we have a steady revenue stream. So I guess to follow up with Trustee Duffy's question, if we did want to explore even dipping below 50%, at least for a library, because of our finance model, it's something we can do. I know it might get a little uncomfortable or nerve-wracking for some to go below 50%, but it is possible to do, correct? If we go that route.
Yeah, I think when you get below 50%, one of the things because you're, as you pointed out, the nice thing about property tax revenue is historically it's been very stable and reliable, but it is lumpy. So you have to be very careful and analyze your cash flow then between those dates and when you get those revenues coming in. So when you get below 50%, you definitely want to put together a good cash flow to make sure you don't run short at some time in your accounts. Because fund balance for everybody, it's taking a snapshot in time, which may not be your high point during the year. So you definitely want to monitor your cash flow in that case. And I don't know if the state has a specific recommendation for all types of units of government. I know for the school districts, to get their best financial profile score, I think you have to have a minimum of 25% to get there. So that would be consistent with that analysis. I think 25%, you wouldn't want to be any lower than that, certainly.
Oh, yeah, so I agree with that.
Right. So
We have a policy that says what percentage we have decided our operating fund will be at.
I believe it's 6 to 12 months, right? I mean, we could always change the policy too if we wanted to go that route. I mean, that's not written in stone. So, I mean, I don't want to get too hung up on that right now. Maybe that's something we could discuss.
And if we focus on one of these options, playing with whether it's 22 or 32, we can look at.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So that's right. It's good that I have the information, but we don't have to dive into the weeds.
Well, that's a good point, actually, to ask those questions now and get some of the weeds, because the plan then would be, between now and the next board meeting, presenting that, is, say you guys, like the example of an $8 million to put together the concept package.
Okay.
Well, what we could do is put together the plans that we're going to be seeing today, and any minor tweaks that might need to be made. Put together the full construction cost estimates and project performance. Put together the schedule on that, but also put the funding options. And there could be options at that point. It could be, okay, the 3.2 versus the 2.6, versus, at least allow that to be on the table at that point in that binder for you to consider next one.
Does,
We have any history on how interest rates to libraries have run in the last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, we maintain an interest rate history file. It's an index called the MMD. Just like stock market uses indices to measure its progress, like the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones Industrials. We use the MMD index just for the municipal bond market in general. And the all-time low in that index was achieved last August. We've now risen above that index. Andrew, I know you just wrote our biweekly market update. What would you say we're above that index from where that low point in August?
Well, I know that we're about 40 points higher than the beginning of the year. But I don't know since the low point. I can probably pull it up.
Yeah, I think we're about 0.5% higher than that low point. So if you look over the last 5 years, we're really at a low point right now for borrowing costs for municipal issuers. That, whether that is sustainable over the long term is going to really depend upon what inflation is, how quickly the economy grows this year, what's the impact of the stimulus on the economy. But at this time, the rates that you achieve today would be, other than certain points last year, would be some of the lowest that you've gotten in not only the last 5 years, but the last 20 years.
Okay, so from a professional perspective, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It sounds like this is a good time to lock in rates. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's a good time to lock in rates with the caveat if you're ready to proceed with your project, because if you sell the bonds, you do have to follow certain tax covenants from the IRS, because you do benefit from tax exemption, meaning you sell your bonds to your investors. They don't have to pay taxes on the interest, so they loan the funds to you at a lower interest rate. But the IRS has these rules you have to follow. One of them, you have to have a reasonable expectation to spend 85% in 3 years. So if you borrow now and you're not going to start, I don't know what the exact timing is for your project, but if it's going to sit around for a year, it cuts into that 3-year time clock.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
so Mark, is it a good time to ask right now if we want to explore the two options, or wait till the end of the conversation and then come
I
back?
think we wait till,
Okay.
because I know, to be honest, when we're looking at what Don's going to present, that kind of show the spread.
All righty. Any other questions or comments for PMA? Seeing none, we will go, and I'm sure we could probably go back if we have to.
Yeah, so Bob, are you able to hang out on the line for a little while? We go through things with the architectural. In case there's questions come up, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, sounds good. And then the next item on the agenda is CNH concept review discussion. Over to that.
Tatiana, do you have to do something so I can share my screen?
Thank you, Bob. So Bob, on the top right of your, I'll call it the dashboard, or whatever you want to call it from GoToMeeting, it should be a change presenter icon. Can you click on that and then click on Don McKay?
I think I can do
Oh, you
it.
can?
Let me try.
Okay, I got it. If you don't. Yep, I just lost it. So.
Okay. Don, do you see? Don. Lovely.
You see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, looks like your screen. How's that?
It's good.
Okay. So we have two slides here that show the west entry concept, and clearly that's not the subject of our discussion here tonight. There were a number of comments made at the last meeting regarding this concept, especially with regard to parking, among some other things. And so we did take a look at how we could improve the parking. And so I'm just going to mention a couple of things very briefly here. And then otherwise, this is really just here for reference tonight, in case we want to come back to it and explore the differences between the renovation concept and the west entry concept. So the big change that we made in terms of the parking on this plan was in the south parking lot here by going to rectilinear parking. In other words, 90-degree parking in the lot. So right now you have diagonal parking. By going to 90-degree parking in the spot in this lot, we were able to substantially increase the number of parking spaces. So we actually increased the number of parking spaces over what you have out there right now. The other thing we did is we were able to get parking spaces closer to the front entry. We modified some of the stair and ramp conditions so that we decreased the distance between the front door and the parking in the scheme. That's really the substantial difference. There was a question earlier in the evening about why is the construction cost so dramatically different between this scheme and the other scheme? And on this scheme, the gray areas that you see represent the back of house areas, but we were essentially, in addition to tearing down a good portion of the one-story part of the building, we were essentially remodeling the entire interior of the building. And so that's a substantial difference with what we're going to show you in the renovation scheme. Again, for reference, this is just the other level of the west entry concept, but really what I want to do is focus on this concept, which is the new renovation concept. And start by pointing out the areas that you see in gray here. The areas that you see in gray here are not necessarily back of house areas, but instead the gray here is showing areas of the existing building that we expect to remain. And this accounts for, Mark pointed out the costs associated with the new exterior walls and foundations and things like that. Another substantial part of the difference in the cost is our ability to reuse existing space within the library. So with this renovation concept, not only are we preserving basically the exterior footprint of the building, but we're also reusing a lot of interior space. And so the degree of remodeling in the gray areas that you see there, that's really going to depend on the budget. We'd like to at least make some cosmetic improvements. Ideally, we get new lighting in those spaces. But beyond that, it's really going to be a function of the money that will be available as we develop the design in this. So what that means then is that the areas that you see in white, which are substantially the public areas of the building, those all do get renovated. And so I think that one of the advantages of this approach is that from a library visitor's point of view, from the public's point of view, when you walk into this library, it's going to feel substantially new compared to the library that you have right now. A lot of the back of house areas, the staff spaces, the meeting room area, the amount of work we'll be able to do in those areas within the budget, that's something that we'll have to work through as we go through it. A couple of other things to point out on this plan. One is that we extended the parking in the north parking lot. If you can see my cursor there, this is to the west of the westernmost entry that comes in off of Front Street right now. So we're really trying to maximize the number of parking spaces that we have on the north side of the building, because this is where our new main entry is located. Now, this is not, these last 6 spaces that you see down at the end here are not ideal spaces, in that it's possible that somebody would, drive down here looking for a space, find that there is none, and then have to back up to come back out. But given the fact that it's a relatively short kind of dead end parking area, we thought that this would be a feasible way of increasing the amount of parking, and maybe it gets dedicated, for some special use or something. The other thing that we did to make the building more accessible to parking that's on the site is we added an entry on the south side of the building on the upper floor plan. And I'll get to that in a minute. But what I'd like to do while I'm in this plan is focus in a little bit on the floor plan and explain the floor plan a little bit better. So one of the substantial differences, one of the big changes that we made in terms of our approach with the renovation compared to earlier renovation approaches that we had shown, was we reorganized the interior of the building so that on the first floor, where you come in the main entry, to one side, to the west side, we have youth services. So, this really works out very well as far as a library function to have youth services on the first floor off of the main lobby space, so that you don't have, parents with strollers and a lot of gear kind of moving through a chunk of the library in order to get access to that space. It actually makes it very accessible, very convenient for people coming in to use the youth services. In that space, we've taken the public areas of the youth services, the popular library and the youth library, and oriented them along the north side where we have access to natural light. And then we've taken the program room, the story time room, if you will, together with the youth services offices and located them kind of at the back of the space. No natural light in these spaces, but prioritizing giving the natural light to the public spaces. So you come in the lobby, you come in the new vestibule here, you enter the lobby, you have your main circulation desk and service checkout located here. We have an opportunity to get some new books in the lobby, art display in the lobby to really activate this in a way that you don't have right now, the way that you come into the building right now. And then at the back of the lobby, we have a vending area and 2 family restrooms. So Mark mentioned the addition of the family restrooms. We located them here because these could be used by the general public as well as by families and youth services. There are 2 public toilet rooms at the west end of the space right now. We're proposing to keep those in place. There's really no reason to take them out. So they're there and available for public use, but the addition of these family restrooms directly off of the lobby space will be a kind of keen addition, I think, to the plan here. Then next to that, we have a new elevator and a stair that gives access up to that upper floor south entry that I mentioned before, and I'll show that in the plan in a minute. We also have the teen area located back here, and then a group of study rooms here, including the reuse of 2 existing study rooms that you have back here in the corner. Opposite the study rooms, the existing circulation workroom is located here, which actually works very well for our drive-up service location. This is something that we talked about at our last meeting, and this is kind of the ideal spot on your building to locate the drive-up service. So having the existing circulation workroom there actually works out very well. And then the rest of the first floor, again, directly off of the lobby, is popular collections for adult services. These would include periodicals, lounge seating, local history, audiovisual collections. And I think one of the things that works out pretty well about this is that you can see coming in the lobby here and having access to the meeting room, there's a kind of natural path all the way across this portion of the library here that provides access to the meeting room and all the way through youth services on the other side. So that path is not interrupting the popular library space that we've dedicated for adult services here on the lower level. The meeting room then would stay essentially as it is right now, where you have your existing entry into the building. We would use that space for a meeting room, a smaller meeting room down there, and also for an exit to meet fire code requirements at the end of the building there. I also want to point out that we are keeping the existing public toilet rooms that are located in that meeting room wing down there right now as well. And then as we move to the upper floor, before we get to the upper floor, I did want to talk about the opportunities with this plan for getting some outdoor program space. So that's one of the significant differences, I think, between the west entry concept and this approach to the project is, where is it feasible to get some outdoor program space? And so we've highlighted 3 areas here in pink that offer potential opportunities, 2 in the north parking lot, and one of the things, and then one at the east end of the building where you have the existing building entry. One of the things to keep in mind is that to incorporate any of these areas as outdoor program space, we're going to lose some parking. So I think, the parking on the north side of the building is particularly valuable. I think especially the parking that's nearest the front door in this area here. I mentioned that this dead end portion of the parking lot is a little awkward. That might be the best opportunity for some outdoor program space. And then the other opportunity is at the east end of the building. And I think that this could work very well if depending on the nature of the outdoor programs and activities that you have, if these were activities that were kind of a natural extension of meeting room programs and things like that, it seems to make some sense to put it down here. However, if these are programs that are typically associated with youth services, for example, it probably makes a little less sense. So I think, this is one of these things that we can study in more detail as we move forward in the plan. And I think, one of the things you'll hear from us as we move forward on this now is that, I think we've got a good correspondence between the design here and the budget and the funding that's available for this, but it's tight. And it's going to require a certain rigor as we move forward to make sure that we keep all of these things in balance. So there are going to be discussions we'll have as we develop the design about choices to be made. Is the outdoor program space at the end of the building here, better than having the parking at the end of it? Be choices like that that we'll go through as we develop this. The one thing that we did not consider for outdoor program space that's been mentioned in the past are some of the adjacent properties that the library owns. And I think, again, the feasibility of using those for outdoor program space probably depends on a few things, one of which is probably the primary thing. What's the nature of those outdoor program spaces and the activities that take place? If those are programs where people are coming to the library for a special event, it probably makes a certain amount of sense to look at using the adjacent properties for that kind of space. If, however, the programs are really associated with something that is also happening inside the library, it makes it much more difficult to take advantage of those adjacent properties to use that. The other potential advantage of creating some kind of outdoor program space on the adjacent properties is the potential opportunity to team with another, civic entity, the park district or somebody to maybe, do something that would be a shared use between public entities. And then moving to the upper floor of the project, I'm going to zoom in here to be able to see this floor plan in more detail. So the upper floor is all adult services. It's essentially the nonfiction collection. Again, the gray area that you see there, those are currently the youth services offices, but we're repurposing those to be the adult services offices in this case. And then the big new feature on this plan is the new vestibule and entry from the south side of the building. So this really allows you to take advantage of all of the parking that you have on the south side of the building and really make put a lot of parking in direct proximity to how you enter into the building. These types of entries, these dual entry library buildings, are a little tricky to work out because you want to make sure that you've got the security that you need. And I think that this plan takes care of that well in a couple of regards. One is that when you come in this upper vestibule, there is a service desk, immediately adjacent to that area. Also, if you take the stairs and go down, it puts you in the lobby, more or less directly in front of. So here's where you come down the stair, and this is also where the elevator would take you out. You're also right in front of the main lobby and the main circulation and service checkout. So I think in terms of security, while this is often a tricky thing to work out, I think this plan can accommodate that and can actually work quite well to do that. One other thing I want to point out regarding the south entry piece is that the second floor is about 4 feet higher than the parking and the sidewalk that's out here right now. This has to be an accessible entrance. In other words, we can't just rely on the north entry to provide accessibility into the building. Code actually requires that if you have multiple entries into a public building, 60% of those entries have to be accessible, which means that if we have two, both of them have to be made accessible. So the options there are to put a really long ramp on the outside of the building, in which case then you would enter at the second floor, and to get down to the lower level, let's say you park your car here, but really what you want to do is go to use services or go to check out an audiovisual material or something like that. You have to go down the full level in order to get to it. So one of the things we tried to do in this plan is take advantage of the fact that grade out here on the south side of the building is actually in between the first and the second floor. And so to illustrate that, we put together this preliminary section, and I'm going to explain
Hey, Don,
what this is. Yeah.
can you go back to the floor plan and just to orient everyone, show the section cut lines and give them a perspective of where they're looking from? I think those help out.
Yep. So what Mark's referring to, you see that there's two labels on either side of the building here labeled section with a line that goes through it. So this is as if we're cutting through the building right along this line, and we're looking in that direction towards the service desk. Okay, so that's where it's located on the lower floor. And then on the upper floor, it's located here. So on the upper floor, it's cutting right through this stair that goes from this entry vestibule up to the upper level here. Okay, so then as I go back to that section, so again, for reference, the right-hand side, this is the north entry. So imagine that here's your parking lot, and out beyond this is Front Street on the other side here. On the south side, this is the south parking lot, and you can see that this is about 8-9 feet higher than grade on the north side of the building. But you can also see that what that means is that south entry, if you come in at grade on that south entry, which works out great for accessibility, you come into a landing that is, it's not halfway in between the floors, but it's more or less in the middle of it, where you come in and you only have to go up half a level to get to the upper floor, or go down, a little more than half a level to get down to the main floor of the building. And you can also start to see, I think, just that one of the other things that does is it really starts to open up some sight lines of view for security to be able to see who's coming in and out of the building as you come in that entry there as well. One of the other things you'll notice on this drawing are these curved elements here. That's really not a clear design idea so much as it is kind of a placeholder for doing something that really calls out and identifies the entry to the building on both the north and the south side. And we think by treating those in a kind of equal way, so that the north side and the south side entries are treated the same, it's not as if one is going to look like a back door into the library, but they both look like primary entries. If you visit the library, if you come there for the first time, I think no matter which way you came in to the site, it would be pretty clear where you go in to get into the library. And then regardless of whether you came in the north side or the south side, you end up in essentially the same spot once you come inside the library. So those are the ways that we modified the plan, took advantage of the existing building, the existing space that you have right now to fit within the $8.1 million project budget that Mark and PMA have talked about so far. So that's our presentation tonight. We're happy to go back and answer any questions that you have.
Don, this is Liz. Would you mind pointing out where the elevator is in the south entry?
Yep. So imagine, Liz, that you come in. So this is the vestibule. This is the exterior door that opens. This is the interior door that you come into. And then imagine the elevator is right here, right next to the stair. So I'm going to go back to the floor plan. So you can see how, here's that stair that I was talking about. The elevator is like directly behind the stair. So that when you come in off this south entry, you can get into the elevator at this elevation, at this floor level. And the elevator's got a front and a back door. So the one door allows you to get in from the south entry side, and then the other door allows you to get on or off the elevator at either the upper floor or the lower floor. Does that explain it?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense now.
Any other questions or comments from trustees?
Yes, can you point out, pretty sure I know where Front Street and Kingston are, but just for clarity, can you point those two streets out, please?
Here's Front Street right here. So this double line that you see here, that's the curb line along Front Street. Here are the two entries in off of Front Street. And then this is Kingston, this diagonal drive that you see along the left-hand side. This is Kingston. And then this is the entry off of Kingston.
Okay, so Kingston is still going to be, is it still going to be one way?
Yes,
Sorry, the entry will be one way.
yes, yes. The entire length of this parking lot would be one way. And yes, it would be, in only off of Kingston.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? No, Secretary Swistek, I see your hand there.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I have some questions about this new renovation concept. One of them, since you're on the upper floor right now, with there being an entry there, I'm assuming that that adult services desk is also going to have to be a checkout desk as well, because we're not going to make people go downstairs to the lower level to check out materials and then go back up to leave, right? So that kind of takes away a centralized circulation or checkout desk that we talked about in the other design.
Yeah, so I'll make a general comment about that, and then Tatiana may want to weigh in on this as well. But I would say that the trend that we're seeing in public library design is kind of a decentralization of the checkouts in the library. So the use of self-check is becoming a much more prominent feature. And one of the advantages of self-check is that you can distribute them throughout the library. And so it's not uncommon, for example, to see self-check stations in the youth services area. So you can imagine if you've got a stroller and a couple of kids, how convenient it would be able to check your books out in the youth services area without having to go out in the lobby and wait in line at the circulation desk. So we see a similar use for self-check stations on this upper floor. So we envision the main circulation desk on the first floor would still function much the way that it does right now, but that you would kind of amend that by adding self-check stations on the upper floor as well.
Okay, thank you. Also still on that floor, I'm concerned about no public restrooms up there. I feel it's a public floor, so I feel like there should be a public restroom up there as well. Yep. And then I'm also concerned about just splitting adult services between upstairs and downstairs. And then the adult services office being upstairs, so not nearby then the other part of their public floor downstairs on the bottom floor, on the lower floor, as far as that goes too. So those are kind of my things with the concerns just about this layout at this point, being on the upper floor that we're looking at here. With the lower floor in this renovation concept, I'm wondering about the teen space. It looks kind of like closed off, so is the idea for that just kind of teen material, but then also a teen kind of hangout space?
I think the exact nature of that remains to be developed a little bit. There was an intent to provide a space. The tricky thing with the teen space is we want to provide a space that they'll feel comfortable in, that it feels like it's theirs, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not part of some other bigger space. But at the same time, we want it to be open enough to the rest of the library so that, it's easy for the library to kind of maintain an eye on what's going on in the teen area. So I think, this is the look. It's off of a very main public path. I think this is going to get a lot of circulation here, because of the meeting room and the elevator and the stairway that's here, the study rooms on the other side, the popular services over here. So we envision this being a very busy area. But I think this is one of the, as we dig into, what are the activities that we want to include in the teen area, as we dig into that and develop that, it's possible that we'll find another spot that makes more sense for the teen area.
Okay, because I was just thinking too, it's, there's no natural light on that side of the building. And so the darkness of that kind of.
No, and Emily, you're getting right at, between ideas like that and putting the toilet room upstairs. These are the kind of trade-offs that we're going to have to work through,
Right,
as we develop the design, right? So you can imagine taking the teen area, moving it over here so that it has access to natural light. What does that do then to the adult services area? On the upper floor, you could imagine, you could imagine taking one of the study rooms out and using that space. You could use this area here for a public toilet room, on that floor, for example, and then lose a study room. So I think, these are the things that have to still be worked out, and it's part of the natural workflow, I would say, of developing a concept like this.
If you wish to apply for or to renew a library card, please do so now.
I can't hear you, Tatiana, with the announcement. So.
Sorry. Okay, and you had mentioned some concerns about dividing the adult services collection. I did run this by the adult services department head, and just for everybody, I mean, right now the adult services collection is kind of divided on the first floor as it is. One side is basically fiction and AV, and then the whole other side is nonfiction. So physically, there is a division between the fiction and nonfiction, but moving nonfiction upstairs with self-check kiosks made a lot of sense to the department director. And as far as the office being on one floor, having the main office on the upper floor made sense, as long as there was like a kiosk desk near teen and fiction that would be staffed by an adult services personnel, because we'd want some supervision in the teen area. And a kiosk desk would not take up a lot of space, and we could manage that in this current model.
The thing too about the restroom, just to answer the questions, I think it's important to note that you can kind of massage where these plans are. Maybe that restroom is just a small, single, stall public restroom, and it fits up there. And we look at maybe even can utilize how much space needs to come out for adult services, and how does that existing restroom work there that's already there. And the problem right now with the upper floor and that your youth services area is already too small for youth services. Over this new plan, when you're splitting up adult services between two floors, room to push things around to get it to fit up there, which is an advantage of doing that.
And there is a restroom upstairs. I mean, it's a staff restroom, right? So I mean, we could keep that or even slightly expand it, right?
For one person use.
Correct. So I mean, there is an option for a restroom. Right?
I think that.
And I understand that. I know that there's a staff restroom up there, right now. I'm just envisioning, that south entrance is going to be the closest entrance to most of the parking. And if people are, maybe with kids and they're rushing to get in, and then they want to be able to get to a bathroom, and then, there's just one, or it's not really accessible, then that might, cause some issues. I'm just thinking that just because of the entrance fact there. And then the other thing that I just wanted to bring up, I know we had talked at some point over the last, I don't even know now, about the current administration offices kind of having some issues with the layout and circulation and things like that. And so I'm just curious about this. If none of that is getting changed, how does that help staff?
I'll take that one just because.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And actually, glad you brought that up. One of the things that I did on the CCS cost model is I factored in what I'll call the L-shaped rooms in the current, or the finance office. That whole area right there where that cursor is moving. I factored in the walls moving in that area to accommodate improving that space. So that's built into the cost you're seeing. How that actually plays out with where exactly the walls need to be to make that space a workable staff area is, to be determined, maybe the next step of design. But to put you at ease there, I did factor that into the cost already of this. And, Don hit on the renovation and the scale of renovation. So we're all aware, I am in my cost model to the $8 million project. I'm assuming that the mechanical rooms, you're not really going to do any work in other than what you have to do for mechanicals of plugging in the electrical circuits or whatever else. Those are not changing. The staff areas, we are, even in the gray areas, we are assuming some, I call it light renovation. In other words, you're not taking down walls, but you might be adding power somewhere because you need to get power to the new desk area, the new desk layout, something like that. I am assuming that you're getting new lighting. I am assuming that you are putting in a new floor or ceiling finish. I mean, not both, but one. And we could massage that. It's all things that you can massage, but there is that at a very, very minimum facelift to all the staff areas so that they get a more productive space in rearranging it. So I will say that much at least built into the $8 million model.
Okay, because I was concerned looking at that office space or that administration space, seeing it looking the same as it's looked, when that's one of the things that we had talked about too, that needed to be fixed, right? So that was kind of concerning to me. And I know Don already mentioned this too, but the outdoor programming space, I really, really want an outdoor programming space. Okay, that's it. I'm done if someone else wants to speak for now.
All right, any other trustee comments or questions?
I guess, sorry.
I don't think anybody had trustee Duffy.
So, I mean, when I saw this and the project cost, so to make sure I fully understand, is what we're looking at right now, Mark, is what you just described as basically an estimated $8.1 million renovation, give or take. But this is kind of what $8 million is going to get us in there. And we just had this nice, great presentation by Bob about what is feasible from a financial situation for us, correct? Is that kind of, okay.
Yes, so there was some push and pull over the past month where we were working with Shenandoah Heart Rate as they were kind of modifying the West concept. And then, KMA was able to do that digging and that research that we brought them on to do. We went back and really focused on the renovation model over the last 2-3 weeks with Don and the team to get it to balance out. So these are the balancing of the funding to the drawings that you're seeing.
And I think it's, I know we're labeling this as a renovation, and I think some people think of renovation as cosmetic, but this renovation has a lot of adds. We are adding a drive-through window. We are adding an elevator. We are adding a teen space. We're adding more study space, and we're utilizing both parking lots in a much more accessible way than we currently are. So there are a lot of adds. The other add is our visibility off of Front Street. So it's not just a cosmetic renovation. And I appreciate Trustee Swift's concern for the gray areas very much. I had those concerns too. And after speaking with Mark and the Shenandoah Heart Rate team, those gray areas can be adjusted and will be adjusted more than likely. I mean, it won't just be a code of.
So I guess so my question then to you, Don, is that does this work also include the landscaping and kind of, the landscaping and work on the grounds outside of the inside as well?
That should be a complete project cost. So it includes site improvements as well as building improvements.
And I'm asking a leading question here. So because this was something that I agree with with Trustee Swissack. I mean, of course, the nice to have was the very nice outdoor programming space.
Computers will be shut down.
But I'll wait.
Check out all materials before leaving the building.
You're good.
Is there a way, I guess what I would then like to see is if we can't have large outdoor programming space, is that maybe in some of the spots that you guys could identify maybe some very small seating areas or something that would be within, because you know how like on the current grounds we have to the south, it's like that little enclave of sorts. Those kinds of things I think are nice. It's not to the grandness, right, of what you and I saw, Secretary Swissack, but on the flip side, I think if something on a much more retracted scale, but something that does offer maybe something to that effect would be nice, and probably within general budget, give or take, right? That was my first comment, and I just want to say I think from when I looked at this is to me a compromise, so that's probably a good thing at the core of it, which is I like the fact that we're addressing, and Mark, I really do appreciate that check-off box thing at the beginning, like what are our needs, right? Like we get sometimes lost in what we want versus what are the needs we're trying to meet, and this does meet the needs that have been identified through our patron surveys, through other patrons, and through focus groups and whatever you want to call it. So I do appreciate the work that went into this. It looks, I like it. I think, of course, I want the outdoor space that just so I can have my 5-year-old run around away from me for a little bit. But that's probably more of a selfish point of view. But I appreciate it.
No, I think, it's been interesting to us, the emphasis that has been placed on outdoor program space. Since the beginning of the design process, we've heard about that. And so I think we recognize that as something that needs to be developed. And frankly, it's something we need to understand better. We need to gain a better understanding of, how often is it used? What activities is it used for? Are they kind of periodic special events, or are they things that happen on kind of a weekly basis? And I think once we gain a better understanding of that, we do understand that it's an important priority for the library, and we will come back to you with some options other than, pink boxes on a site plan that kind of show you how that could be accommodated. We showed the site plan in enough detail to show, for example, on the east end of the building, we're taking out the structure that's there, we're putting in new parking. So there's a cost associated with that, and that's built into the cost model right now. Now, whether we spend that cost on, asphalt and curb for parking, or whether we spend that cost on landscaping to create an outdoor, program space, there's a certain amount of cost that's already built into the model for that. Similarly, with this portion at the west end of the north lot, we've built in the cost associated with extending this north lot the way that we've shown it here. And again, whether that cost is spent on landscaping or whether it's spent on parking, there's something in the model for that. So I think that we hear you, and I think we have gone through a lot of iterations of this plan since we got started, and wrestling with fitting everything into the existing building. That's where really our energy has been spent. And I think that, yes, there's definitely more energy to be, a kind of similar amount of energy to be spent thinking about what happens, outside of the building, in particular this outdoor program space that we're talking about. But I'm confident that we've got some opportunities, and we'll figure that out as we go forward.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good consequence that came from.
The librarian
Because,
now. Please turn off your radios. Good night.
Because COVID forced us to do a lot of more outdoor programming than we may have done inside. And I think we had Tatiana, you can affirm this, that we had a lot of good positive feedback from patrons about the outdoor programming. And then our pre-COVID outdoor programming, you would get a lot of people there showing up, but those were more, let's say, 2 to 3 special. But I think that's kind of why I think at the last week I sort of asked about programming, because I do think now you're probably going to see at least some type of movement to using more outdoor space because people liked it. And so I think that's probably why I was sort of asking. But I don't think I don't want to lose sight of why we're here. I just wanted to bring that up as a thing.
Vice President Bartelli.
Do we address at all the outside facade? Are there any?
No, it's a good question. We're reusing the existing building. And so I think, again, this is something that we need to develop as we go forward. We have talked about options for how to improve the exterior of the building. And the options range from something as simple as a good quality paint that's made to go over stone and wood and, things like that. That might be a way of kind of unifying the building, giving a kind of unity of character that it lacks right now, to, hanging new panels on the outside of the building to really change the character of the outside of the building. So I think, we've thought about it. We don't have a definite idea about it yet. I think it's going to be largely budget driven. I think, the approach that we're taking here is to focus the expenditures on the interior improvements, the things that are really going to make a difference to the people who use the library on a daily basis. I think that, we've recognized, at least in the section drawing that we've shown, that we want to spend something on the entries to address the issue of, how do I know where to go into the building when I arrive? That kind of thing. And then I think, how we treat the rest of the outside of the building is going to be driven by the budget. Again, this is an area where there might be choices to be made about, one option versus another. I think in general, though, the approach that we're taking is kind of committing to working with what's on the building right now. In other words, we don't envision tearing off, the outside skin of the building and replacing it with something else. The budget just doesn't allow for that kind of approach. I think our approach going forward is to work with what's there right now and look at ways of changing the character of what's there right now. And we can, I mentioned these panels that could be hung on the outside. We can show you options, for what all these things mean, and share with you the costs that are associated with them, just so you have an understanding of what's possible.
Okay, thank you.
Any other trustees? So there are a couple quick, we got the questions that have been addressed elsewhere, but on the east lot, how it's current 43 and proposed 62, is that increase only because of the 90-degree parking? Is that the whole additional parking?
That is actually an error in the number. Okay. So we corrected it. This should be, the existing number of spaces there is 53, not 43.
Okay, gotcha.
So there's a net gain of 9 spaces in the east lot, not 19.
That's because of the 90-degree parking?
Exactly. Yeah. That's because of the parking that we're putting in place of where your entry is located right now.
Okay. And as far as, I know a lot of people are for outdoor space. I mean, we could always use the stormwater detention area, right? I mean, I know that's obviously weather permitting. If it's obviously wet and muddy, that would not be usable, but we could always
utilize that if we wanted to, right? Or, no.
But
That's really, I think it's really hard to count on that being
Because of the-
available and in the right condition to be able to use it for outdoor programming.
Gotcha.
There are accessibility issues with that too.
I'm trying to get people in there and out of there, it's maybe that.
Okay. Is there only one family bathroom in this plan, or is there two?
There are two,
One.
The room right,
so they're right next to each other here.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I didn't see that. Okay.
There's actually more restrooms in
Yeah,
this plan than we.
yeah, 'cause I didn't see the second. Okay, gotcha. Trustee or Secretary Swistek.
Thank you. Of course, now my thought went away. What were we talking about? Two things. One, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the West concept is completely off the table now. Is that what we're saying? We're saying West End's completely off the table, and this is what we're focusing on is just kind of a pretty much an interior renovation and then potentially the outside too. Right? Is that what we're saying?
I mean, I think anything's still on the table.
I think it's still on the table. I think that looking at the funding options though, even reaching up to the $9.6 million was a reach in terms of what it did to your corporate fund and the balances that are there. So, and I do not foresee a way to get the West concept as it's currently proposed. And in other words, with the demo, the renovation, and really reworking the whole site down to that even $9.6 million level. So unless there's another means to get funding, more funding, I don't see that.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was clear. I saw that on Mark, your portion of the agenda. It said that your goal for tonight was to have a consensus basically moving forward on one design. So I just wanted to make sure that I was reading the room, digital room, correctly as far as that goes, and that's what we are working towards right now. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that. And then the other thing I just was wondering, the director mentioned earlier, you said that you talked to the director of adult services about the splitting of the adult services on the 2 floors. And I'm just kind of curious about other staff, how they feel about this concept as well, since they're the ones that have to work in it.
Well, I think the plan is to, before I started conferring with everyone, the department directors were apprised of the board packet, everyone in the public was. Because the adult services department had the most change, I met more extensively with her to make sure that was acceptable. I imagine youth services is pleased to be on the first floor and to have an expanded space. And circulation, I think, are comfortable in their current offices, as well as having the drive-through connected and not disconnected, because there was a plan where there was a disconnection or an option. And I think that was causing a bit of stress. I know that technical services is very comfortable in their space and being close to the receiving door and having things kind of as usual is another comfort level there. And they have a nice amount of space. Administration is tight, and as mentioned, we'll need some reconfiguring there. But all in all, I think this is a comfortable arrangement and affordable, practical, and as I mentioned before, we're getting a lot of ads that we didn't have and don't have now. There's something else. I do appreciate the outdoor space where Trustee Duffy mentioned, and I know Emily, you said too. I see the east side where the east pink was as the most viable use of an outdoor area because they're I think that using that parking spaces as opposed to using north side parking spaces, I would not want to do that, because if we're having a north entrance, I want enough parking on the north side. And in using the east side, it's also closer to the hardscape area that we currently have, as well as those 14 spots if we wanted to have a larger space. And I'm very excited about exploring an intergovernmental type of option for one of the lots, if possible. Again, that would be down the line, but I think that's definitely a possibility.
Okay, thank you for that. And I remember too, we've had conversations about just issues with like the server room and kind of things being kind of patchwork as far as that goes. So in this plan, would we be able to fix that?
Yes, so in the costs that I've held, it would be renovating the, I call it the data, and that package throughout the building. So we have to work with the team to figure out exactly where that room is. And the thought is it could stay roughly where it is right now in terms of where all the lines coming out of. But we really taking a look at that room, reworking it, and then fixing the data throughout the building so you have appropriate access to technology.
I do remember one more thing, Emily, you had mentioned about the department directors is that I believe, and I talked to Mark about this already, is that after the board kind of congeals around one basic model, and of course, some of these boxes in these models can shift around, like we were talking about the team area, the study rooms, but the general idea of keeping within kind of below base model of the 8.1, once we determine that tonight, I think that the architects and the department heads will meet again to talk more about detail and how workflow would work best in each of the departmental boxes. So there will be more meetings with the department directors to make sure that space works for them.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Any other trustees? The only quick question, this is more for Director Weinstein or the architects. Is the book drop that we have, is that going to still remain there or get relocated, or is it going to go away with the drive-through window?
I think that's still there, right?
Oh, it's still there, but
It's still there.
It's just
that's one of those things that can be.
That's fine. I just,
It can be moved.
I just want to make sure. That's all I have for questions on this too. Any other trustee questions, comment? Trustee Duffy.
One very quick question to both Mark and Don is when you look at the estimated budget for all of the gray spaces, I guess I'm not going to have like theoretically two different types of carpet in this building, right? It's all going to be one paint. It's all going to be like everything's going to be. I'm going to use the term renovated, but I understand that it's not just a renovation. Because that's one of my concerns is that some spaces don't get touched, and we know that there's an issue, right? Like, is this a lease where you're saying workflow and walls are going to be moved to help the staff, but we're also going to make sure that there's one consistent flow throughout the entire building when it comes to aesthetics?
The answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I think from a public perception, as I said earlier, when you walk into this, it's going to feel like a new library building. I mean, it's a kind of complete renovation of the interior spaces. So once you're inside the building from a public perspective, I'm not sure you'll really notice the difference between the renovated project and new construction if this were an entirely new library building. So we're using the word renovation, and I'm afraid it's giving the wrong impression about the rather dramatic change that you'll see in terms of the interiors. Now, in the grayed out areas, the kind of back of house areas and the meeting room area where we are trying to make some fiscally responsible decisions by minimizing the amount of work that we do in those spaces. Yes, we're still going to have new carpet in there. Hopefully we'll have new lighting. I mean, lighting systems have probably advanced more than any other building system in the last 15, 20 years. And just replacing the lighting in those spaces would be a substantial improvement to the environment. But You know, and we can have multiple selections of carpet. You know, carpet is priced the same per square foot. You know, so you know, we do imagine a kind of rich variety to what you see in the spaces, so that, you know, youth services has a distinctly different character than adult services. But that as we develop the interior design, it will all kind of hang together. It'll feel like it was all done, you know, at the same time. It won't feel like you walk in and part of the building feels like it's new and part of it feels like it's really old. So, you know, that's our approach, and I think that's certainly within the budget that we've established. I don't know, Mark, does that ring true to you?
It does. You know, the lighting is such a huge factor, and that's why we did include that in the pricing for even the back of house spaces. We knew that was important. Flooring, it makes sense not only in terms of aesthetics, but honestly in maintenance, in terms of let's get that new, let's get it replaced, because it is worn throughout the building here. And we really took a look at the staff areas and said, okay, you're going to be doing it. You might not be having, you know, staff areas in a lot of libraries are defined by the shell, the walls, which you're seeing here aren't changing, but more so on the furniture that goes in there. So if you're able to replace some desks and different chairs or casework, you know, the cabinetry that's on there, that's going to go a long way in helping the efficiency for the staff members, more than they got an extra 2 feet wide or something like that. So that's what we factored into this cost.
Thank you.
Mark?
And I volunteer for President Hummel to pick out the carpet. I know that's.
Did somebody else have a question or comment?
Yes.
Trustee Sullivan.
Mark, I have a quick question for you. In addition to everything that you're talking about in terms of lighting for the staff and furniture for the staff, will there be consideration to improving airflow as well?
So I'm sorry, kind of improving flow is what I heard, but do you mean how people move through the spaces?
No, air, AIR, flow for staff.
Airflow.
Oh, airflow. Okay, sorry. So we have factored in making branch ductwork changes. So not the mains, right, but the actual little the rooms and reconfiguring those. So I would assume that an engineer will come in here in the next phases of design and do some analysis on what is going to be best. But putting a register 5 feet over here and, you know, the return somewhere about 5 feet from where it is, that can be accomplished. You know, we're not assuming that we're going to be replacing the main ductwork, because it goes from from east to west across the whole building. And we also are not assuming replacing the air handling units, because you just did that. So we're trying to maintain the amount of money you've already spent in there. Does that make sense? Hopefully that answers it?
Yes, what I was concerned about is it just looks to me, and I'm no expert, that the way some of those walls and offices might have been constructed, they might restrict airflow. And there are times where I've been in administrative offices, maybe the air wasn't moving as well as it could be.
It's something we can put on the radar for the design team to take a look at the next step with the mechanical engineers. And really
okay.
That's a good point.
One of the offshoots of improving the lighting is we'll be going with LED light fixtures, which do not generate near as much heat as the existing light fixtures do, and will decrease heat load and things in the building.
Okay, great.
Any other questions or comments? None? All right. Anybody want to wrap it up?
I think that to wrap it up, I think there was a lot of value in looking at, you know, the high end and the low end in terms of cost, as we've seen earlier today in the comparison. The value is trying to look at some of the idealized positioning of spaces. You know, one of the things I took away from the West concept is that the youth area was right off the main entry. Well, you're looking at a renovation scheme, or renovation plus add scheme, that is doing the same thing. So there was definitely some value that the design team got out of that. So I think the concept phase in terms of plans, I'm not hearing things right now that says we want to holistically change the renovation plan. If that is a financial type of scale, $8 million or so, that you'd like us to package for that final concept package. So I think my question to the board is there any detraction from the design team and CCS and PMA working to put together that package at the $8.1 million level to then put together, again, a project schedule, and that we talk about phasing a little bit maybe next time. Are you going to be, how could you foresee phasing this project? And or potentially utilizing a different space if that needs to be looked at or not. But the design plans, as they essentially are now, detailed costs and detailed funding options, putting that all together for you in an $8 million package. Is there anything else besides that that you say, hey, I need to see before we can make a decision on moving into the next step of design or project to no project type of thing?
Could we see more of a 3D version of the $8.1 million project like we saw last go round, something a little bit more visual than a blueprint?
And I'll defer to Don a little bit on this. I think the 3D would really help explain maybe some of the site movement and how the parking lots and how things would work to get into the building. The entry, the look of the entries, I think is something that needs to be defined a bit more in the next phases of design, but getting an idea of how the relationship of the entry to where you park to where you walk, that's probably something that could be looked at. Don, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Any issues though? I didn't hear any detractions, so I take that as we're getting you guys in the right direction.
Good. So everybody okay with that? Everybody okay?
Is everyone pleased with the progress we've made through this phase?
Okay, we got thumbs up.
All right, I feel like thumbs up. So
Yes, today was really productive and I think it was educational, at least for me.
great. All right, so we'll look at
I'm going to interject for a second, Mark. We haven't heard from Treasurer Norton this evening, and I kind of want her input. So I'm going to put you on this spot, Jenny, because we just haven't heard from you, and I just kind of feel, you're 1/7 of our board, and we need to hear from you.
Oh, Secretary Swistek, that is mighty kind of you. I don't want to repay that kindness by being the contrarian, so I'm not sure what to say other than I'm having sticker shock, and I don't really have much constructive comment to offer at this stage. I'm hoping that the next conversation that we have makes me a little more comfortable than I feel right now, or maybe a lot more comfortable.
Is there something you'd want to see in terms of information that would answer questions that you might have?
I don't think so. I mean, I appreciate that this is an iterative process and that, we've had an opportunity to provide feedback and that feedback has been incorporated. And I'm glad to see that there is seemingly a majority consensus, though I don't consider myself among it right now. But I'm definitely hopeful that through collaboration, we'll get to some form of, universal agreement on things. But for me personally, I guess maybe I just don't know enough about overall project costs, but it doesn't feel like the $8 million current sketch is, how do I put this? It feels like it costs a lot more than it should for how little it's transforming things. Yes, maybe it checks a lot of the boxes for needs, but that price tag overall seems high for everything that had to be given up from what we thought was going to be really, checking all of the boxes that we were trying to check.
I guess, is there a way to line item some of these expenses or kind of ballpark, like
break it down.
So, yeah, like a breakout, like doing this cost X amount of dollars, or, I mean, I know it kind of, it
Yeah,
might be
so-
difficult to do, but is there a way to maybe, or even like general, like, this is why this costs $8 million?
Well, and this is all new for us because understanding what project costs, it's important for us to understand that. So,
Yeah.
if you can, elaborate now a little bit and maybe or provide me with something that I can supply the trustees, offline, to further educate, them and myself on the project costs. Because I know you and I have talked a lot more, and I've talked to the architects more than the trustees have. So I'm getting a little bit better idea of the general costs for some of these, ads that we are doing, but I think that it would benefit the trustees to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. I think the different breakdowns we can definitely provide and give a sense of, where our costs going in terms of this project. Is it all going to site workers, all going somewhere else? And we do have that information. I just wanted to get a sense of how to bundle it, which I think I have gotten from here and going towards $8 million project. So that we can give you that and also give you some comfort that, okay, what you're getting for the dollars, or what we're expecting you to get for the dollar is within range. To give you a sense, just I'll put it out there in terms of not doing anything. If you just did your facility condition assessment work over the next 15 years or so, with escalation and with project costs baked into there, you're looking at spending maybe $3 million and not improving the building at all. And that, that means youth service is still the same size it is today, if not smaller, because you had to take out space from it to put a family restroom up there. Things like that. So and that's something to maybe give you a little bit of a ballpark there, but we'll definitely break that down and give you the detail.
I think the other thing that could help us to address this question in a meaningful way would be if you have some reference point in mind, something that you are comparing this to or something. It would be helpful for us to understand that, because sometimes that's a useful way to explain what the differences are.
Right. I tried not to have, with no background in construction and only, personal home experiences with renovation and improvement. I really didn't, and of course, plenty of accounting experience with companies, but not with doing a building improvement with it. So I just, with these scattered experiences that were not a carbon copy of what we're doing here, I wanted to try to appreciate my inexperience and let the process unfold and be open and give benefit to doubts along the way. My reference point right now is just, we have A and B on the table just at this moment. We have, 8 million north renovation with a south entrance as well. And we have west with the $13+ million option. And to me, it looks like if these they're almost two extremes in my book. It's here's everything we want at a price tag we can't afford, and here's something at a more affordable price point, but sacrificing a lot more than I thought we would have had to for just a less than 50% cut of the the all-in option. So that's my reference point, is that it doesn't seem linear is not the right word, but it doesn't seem proportional. So we're going from 13.5 to 8.1, or sorry if my decimals are off a little bit. It feels like we're hardly touching a lot of structural things that we thought were going to be really valuable and relevant, that we talked a lot about in earlier conversations. And so I would have thought it would have taken the price down more by several million. But I do like what Mark brought up in terms of that, let's just, as a reference point, talk about maintenance only, FQC, what if we did nothing other than what we needed to do to keep things moving along? I think that's a helpful, $3-ish million. That tells you if we did nothing, that we think that, from a strategic plan process that has already been done, what we should do to ensure long-term success of the library on all fronts, that's the least that you could do. Then I think that, somewhere beyond that is certainly where we all envision that it should be. But how far beyond that, eight concerns me right now for what it seems to be able to accomplish.
Vice President Bartelli?
Well, Don, I'd like your comment about having some reference point in to tie all of this in. So at the beginning of the meeting, during the public comments, we had a speaker refer to our 2000 total renovation, 2007, I'm sorry. Okay. What was the cost then, and what exactly did we do? Speaking of a renovation.
I can answer that.
I'm not finished. I'm not finished. It takes me a while to get these things out, Director White. So when I have a thought, I have to do it. Okay, so we start, these are my baselines. So we're out in the public and we hear our residents, as well we should. And I appreciate all of the comments we get. But to put it as a total renovation at the cost at that time, and then Mark's remark about FQC, which, that was a great exercise for us. And that would cost $3 million at today's cost, possibly. So if we do nothing, as some of the residents would like us to do, to address, so we need a reference point. So how do we get there, Don? Do we go back to 2007? What did we get now from 2007 to now? How many years? And it's a question of perception. What do we all see in our library that we feel, this current board feels, we need to improve on? We've gone through the surveys and so on and so forth. There's got to be a way to address first of all, Jenny, your comment about the price tag. I have to admit, I'm very surprised, but I'm in the same boat you are. Only home renovations. Have no clue about a library renovation. We've got to be able somehow, I don't want to use the word justify. We just have to be able to pull this together somehow, because we're being, I feel we're just being torn by do nothing, just paint, and let's fix the maintenance systems we haven't addressed. And that's also another perception, I think, to some of our residents, that we did nothing and now we have to fix everything. That's not true. And I know our director has done an excellent job countering some of the ideas that are floated out there. I'm just having trouble reconciling.
So I think if I could just speak to it for a minute. One of the reasons we ask about reference points is that this is a common problem in public projects, because we are often dealing with, whether it's an elected board like you or the general public, with people who they don't do this all the time, the way that we do or the way that Mark does. And so you have a very different reference point for these kinds of things. And when people use terms like renovation or total cost, you would be surprised at how differently those get defined from one project to another. And so I think if there is something that's meaningful to you and to the community, whether it's a reference point as the 2007 renovation that took place, it might be worthwhile to dig into that and figure out exactly what was done and exactly what the costs were, and find a way to compare it to what's being proposed here right now. But I would say that in our experience, more often than not, you're being asked to compare apples to oranges. And, they really don't line up. And the way that we satisfy ourselves that what we're doing is responsible, and, these are civic projects. I mean, the fiscal, we understand the fiscal responsibility that comes with these projects. And one of the ways that we test ourselves on these things is we have experience working on other civic projects. And, so we understand, what things cost in this realm. And I think we probably do take it for granted a little bit, because we deal with it all the time, and we probably need to find a better way to communicate it. What I can tell you for what it's worth, tonight, none of these costs are extravagant. Compared to other public library renovations, none of the costs that CCS is using here are extravagant or kind of out of bounds by any means. And, one of the things I wonder is if there's a way that we could somehow compare what we're proposing for your library to something that's been done to, another library or other libraries. Is there a remodeling that you saw of another library someplace that you were really impressed by, and want to, use that as kind of a benchmark for these things. So, I'm very confident that if you were to benchmark what's being proposed here against other similar projects, it would not be out of line at all. But I think what we need to do, and it's why I asked the question of a reference point, what we need to do is find, the reference point that would be meaningful, to allay the concerns of board members and, help you address the public relations issues that are always associated with a project like this. So.
And then to Trustee Bartelli's question about the 2007 renovation, it was not a total renovation, absolutely not. The only square footage that was added was minimal to install the atrium windows. And everything else was cosmetic. It was paint and carpeting. Youth services was not changed. The whole fiction collection was not changed. The shelving was moved in the nonfiction into that fan shape. And that was about it. I believe the cost of that renovation was about $1.7 million.
You're still replacing mechanical units and things recently, which means they were not replaced in 2007.
Right.
Yeah.
And can I just ask a question now, also for public projects, is part of the reason, and this is not, I'm not making a debate if it's good or bad, but it's because of prevailing wage that does drive up the cost of a public sector project. Like if this was a private building, I mean, it would, maybe you might be able to save a little bit on labor costs.
You might be able to save a little bit, because of the rules around prevailing wage. You're doing a home renovation project. You're not putting in floors that can withstand carpet that can withstand the traffic that a public institution manages. It's the material quality and it's, again, like Don said, it's not something that we're giving premium costs, and they're building premium costs in this. We are really looking at really average, I'd say, material costs, and having the factor in prevailing wage is a significant factor in that. So yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, we use firms like CCS, Mark's Group, on every project because they give us more realistic prices. Architects are romantic idealists. We'd like it all to work for less too. Don and I have each done work on our plumbing in our own houses and are shocked at what it costs because we didn't have it estimated by professionals. We just went into it with this idea, and I think these costs for the type of work that's being done do seem very much in line with similar costs that we're running into on St. Charles Public Library right now. They pass the smell test. I don't see anything that's being estimated that's outside of the norm for public project.
Just to put it in some context, Director Weinstein mentioned the 1.7, which was essentially some minimal finishes, a floor, some paint, and then a small addition on the atrium, right?
It was windows.
Oh,
window system, like a bay.
So in the $5.7 million and change construction cost, That's the portion of construction from the project. I'm looking at my breakdown. The interior construction should be building new partitions where the renovation is. The interior finishes, that's your ceilings and floors and paint. And some of the specialties like the built-in casework and all that, that's basically round up to $1.18 million, right around there. So it's pretty comparable right there. You know, the bulk of you have exterior enclosure costs with putting in the new vestibules. You'll get all of this, and they will send it offline, but we will break it down, give you a lot of that detail so you can see where these costs are going. But that puts it somewhat in line with the 1.7 that was spent. Keep in mind 13.
Can you chunk it down to some sort of summary that a public person, a taxpayer, would be likely to read through? They're not going to read through like a long list. I think they would appreciate, I mean, as a taxpayer, I know I don't read through long lists. As a taxpayer, I think they would appreciate seeing, chunks of items, Could you figure out how to do that and send it to us?
Yes, I will do it. I'll take some time to figure out and work with Director Weinstein to figure out what might be the best breakdowns, but we'll do that.
Great.
Trustee Duffy.
So let me just make sure I understand. Mark, basically of the 8 million, right? 2.3 million or something to that effect, I think. That is just all of those repair projects that we have lined up that we know we have to get done over the next short period of time, right? Like the next 3 to 10 years, something to that effect. So I think that is like, and I think I've said this before, that is why maybe the sticker shock could be there, is because that money is out. It's sort of like use the home ownership, right? It's putting a new roof on your house, but it doesn't really come back with a lot of value outside of you just don't have leaks. And in reality, as you just outlined, there's 5.7 million that's going into this actual updating of the library and its space, which if 14 years ago we spent 1.4 million for an atrium and some paint and carpet, once that's broken down, it makes complete sense. I mean, we're trapped in a situation where we have to do these $2 million worth of projects to literally just keep the building operating at its base level. There's no choice about that. So I think that it makes a lot more sense. I think that's something that, as you kind of do that sort of breakout, is very critical for people to understand. This isn't even just like $1 million of updating of like stuff to the building. We're talking $2 million that we have to put into this building if they want the library just to exist as is. So that's why you do this all coupled together, because interest rates are great and you don't have to borrow a whole lot and you're already in the building doing this work. So you're saving on future costs down the road.
And to that point, it's interesting. We see a lot of libraries go through, we talked about it a long time ago, cycles, right? Where you're going to renovate the interior. So you're going to do work on the building. And at this point in time, the interest rates are low. And from here on out, the construction costs are only going to go up. So every year you push that out, you're putting interest rates at risk, I would say, and you're going to see an escalation. We factor in about 3% escalation per year, which compounds. So you can see how quickly that starts jumping costs up if you put it out another 10 years and interest rates are up. All of a sudden you're not able to do a project without increasing, limiting rates or a referendum to go and actually give a true tax increase to the public, which this library has taken great strides in attempting to avoid.
Now the other question, I think you just logged off too, but do we want to look at the option of I'll just get to this quick and we can come back. With the financing, I think I know like trustee Duffy brought it up. We also want to have them look at an option besides the 1.6 million of funding or borrowing, to look at one with 1 million.
I think we could look at a variety.
Okay.
For
Are
sure.
we good with that? Just a quick thumbs up. Good. All right.
No,
Oh,
no,
Lisa?
there, I don't think we should right now. I mean, go ahead and look at it. This is the lowest interest rate in terms of borrowing money. I really don't want to go below 50% in terms of what we have in our operating fund. So I don't see why we would even investigate that option, but it's late. In the interests of agreement, go ahead and figure it out.
Okay. It doesn't.
Just to see
Yeah,
it.
just to see it. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? You guys got everything you need, or any other questions or comments?
So we'll pull away with an offline breakdown, right, and then some comparison.
Yes, so we'll come up with those reference points and breakdowns, and then we will work to package a concept-based package. And then we'll also start looking at what the next phases would be, so we can give you the information to consider next time we meet. I mean, if we meet, there's a special meeting needed.
We're gonna do a special, or we gonna?
All right, sounds good.
I think it might have to be a special meeting.
Okay. And we got to talk budget at the next meeting too, so that might be probably what we'll have to do. Any other questions, comments? You guys got what you need?
Did you get what you needed? I think you heard it, right?
All right. If there's anything else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
This is Secretary Swissack. I move to adjourn.
Second, Mrs. Sullivan.
Trustee Larson already got it. All right.
Got
Wait.
Bob, did you wave bye, hopefully? You have a question?
I saw him wave bye. Okay, he's good then. Roll call, please. Pardon? Oh, any questions or any comments? Or are we good? All right, roll call, please.
Emily Swissack,
Aye.
Karen Larson,
Aye.
Tom Duffy,
Aye.
Jenny Norton,
Aye.
Liz Sullivan,
Aye.
Marjorie Bartello,
Aye.
Thomas Hummel.
Aye, and we are adjourned at 9:49. Thank you.